is, or what I'm attempting to do today, is to just do kind of a short tutorial of Crossfire and to kind of run through getting set up with Crossfire for the first time and building a puzzle with it. What this video or stream is not meant to do is to teach you how to construct crosswords, how to make a theme, all that stuff. There are people who have done that better. There's a video from Sid Sivakumar where he goes through constructing a crossword, and he's going to run through all the same things with Crossfire that I'm going to talk about today. But his video is about 3 hours long, and I'm hoping I can kind of condense down some of the key elements of getting set up with Crossfire for people. Because some people, especially on the Crossword Discord, have mentioned that it can be kind of confusing getting used to this new software. So I'm just going to kind of run through some of the basics, how you would get set up using this for the first time. And hopefully that's helpful to you. And if it turns out well, hopefully you'll find this on YouTube and people can use it as a resource. And if it doesn't go well, then we won't talk about it. So, first and foremost, Crossfire is a crossword constructing software. You can get it from Beekeeper Labs is the maker, and I highly recommend that if you're going to use it for making puzzles consistently for any amount of time, that you go ahead and purchase the license to use it officially. It's $50. I think it's well worth it. If you make puzzles for any amount of time, if you sell one puzzle, then you'll recoup that fee. And while the software isn't perfect and definitely has its issues, I think it's worth supporting the developer and keeping them in business. So I don't know. I think there's probably some elements of it you can use without a license. Like you might not be able to save. And I know that people do stuff with screenshotting and all that, but my recommendation to you is if you're going to use it for any amount of time, buy the license. It's worth it. It will pay for itself pretty easily. So when you get set up for the first time, it's going to ask you about some configurations. You can kind of ignore that stuff at the beginning and then come back to it later if you need to, but I will run through the same things. You can get those from the menu that you do in your initial setup. But the first couple things you're going to want to do probably when you get this software is to get set up with a word list. So this is a subject that has caused really no end of confusion for people. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. A word list is simply a document listing a bunch of different words, which could also be phrases and such, and then typically they're scored. So the typical format, if you want to make your own word list, it's super easy. You just write the word or phrase, often in all caps. That's just kind of standard nomenclature, but you don't have to. And then a semicolon, and then a score. Scores run from 0 to 100. Various lists are going to break that up in different ways. So some lists max out at 60. Some of them will max out at 90 or higher. Some people use specific numbers for specific things. Just depends on what works for you. At the moment, I think the easiest way to get going with a word list is to go to www.spreadthewordlist.com. This is a data-driven word list project by Brooke Husick and Enrique Enestroza Anguiano. Hope I said that right. And they're offering it for free and very great resource for new constructors. So you're going to want to go to that website, click on Our Free Word List, and then from there you're going to have a couple options for downloads. For Crossfire, you can download the .dict file, DICT, that's short for dictionary. Crossfire will like that. Honestly, my experience using Crossfire in Windows is that text files, .txt, work just fine for dictionary files. But I have seen some people on the Discord have some issues getting it to recognize the file type. So if that happens to you, make sure that you're using a .dict file and not a .text file. And another thing that I've seen be a pitfall for people is sometimes if you just go in and change the name of the file to .dict, but the file names are hidden, you'll just have a .text.dict, and it won't recognize that because it it still thinks it's a .text or whatever. Like I said, I think text files work just fine on PC, but that might be different on Mac. So sorry if that doesn't quite work for you, but hopefully you can get that sorted. And then my recommendation for you, having just read something recently about how younger generations don't use file folders, once you download your dictionary file, move it to a location where you're going to be able to keep track of it, presumably a puzzle folder. So for me, I keep all my puzzle stuff in OneDrive. That way it's backed up digitally. So for me, it's, OneDrive/puzzles, and then dictionary file goes in there. And I would also recommend at that stage, copy that file, paste it into another location, basically make a backup folder, paste it into that folder, and then rename the file. So they're two different files, rename it backup or whatever. And that way, as you're working on your lists and editing words and whatnot, you have a backup in case things go disastrously wrong, as they're basically bound to if you do this for long enough. So save yourself disaster and go ahead and make backups of all the dictionary files that you're using in advance. And make sure you have a folder set aside for your puzzles, because there's going to be a lot of files produced there eventually. You're going to want to have those all at hand. So with that said, you've got your folder set up, you've got your dictionary, at least one set up. Crossfire does have a default dictionary. It's called default.dict, I believe. We're going to go now into the edit folder. We're going to go to config, and this is where we're going to look at some of our dictionary settings. So in here, this is tricky. So it's not going to pop up on my stream, which is slightly frustrating. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to screen share instead, but let me just make sure that you're not going to see too much of crazy streaming stuff, because it's going to pop up and go crazy because I've got my Twitch studio open here. So let's see if we can just switch to display. And we're going to minimize that. And we're going to maximize Crossfire here. So now we can pull some of this stuff up. Now I'm going to miss chat and all that stuff, but hopefully now you should be able to see folders and such. So you see here again, we went to, show you one more time, edit, config, and this is going to have all the dictionary stuff. And so we're not going to look at the fill tab for a minute. We're going to go to dictionary. So you'll notice a couple things here. I've got a bunch of different dictionaries. You can see I have the default one unchecked. So unchecking that box, what that means is that Crossfire is not going to use that dictionary at all for fill. So if you have a list that you don't want to use for whatever puzzle, uncheck it. It won't be used at all. So if there's a word in there that's only on that list, that's not going to come up at all for your fill. You can see I've got quite a bunch of different dictionaries here. The one that's in bold is what Crossfire calls its primary dictionary. You can change that with the Make Primary button here. And what that means is that if you push edits to your word list, it's going to automatically edit it or add it to that dictionary, depending on if it was in that list before. And if you add a new word, then that's the dictionary that it's going to go to. So keep track of where that file is, because that's where all your new words and edits are going to go to. And you'll see when we go to edit some words that you can also change which dictionaries you're editing words in. For example, if you don't want to edit the base dictionary that you're pulling words from, you can do that, or you can make sure you change it in the original, either way. And then, as you can see, I've got a bunch of these here, and they're in a certain order. And what the order does for Crossfire is, if it only shows up in one word list, Crossfire is going to pull that word up at the score in that word list. But if it shows up in multiple word lists, it's going to take the score from the highest dictionary. So in this case, new edits, which is my primary dictionary, if there's a word in there that I have deliberately scored down to 5, say, because it was, something that I didn't want showing up in my puzzles, but it's in, for example, the Broda list, scored as 60 or whatever, because this is a higher ranked dictionary, Crossfire is going to give it a score of 5. And then if it's under my minimum threshold, that means it's not going to make it into the puzzle at all. So if you want to move those things around, the up and down buttons here, boop, boop, allows you to change the ranking of your dictionaries. So you can decide what do you want setting the primary score for stuff, just depending on which lists you're using. And then again, you can check or uncheck various dictionaries depending on which ones you want to use. Obviously, you can delete or add new dictionaries from here as well. Again, if you format it in the word list format, word, and then semicolon, and then a score from 1 to 100, you can just add those directly. And again, I think Windows takes text files, but if you just rename them to .dict, Crossfire will like that as well. Couple little things on this tab here. This is slightly beyond the scope of what we're talking about today, but you can Google the Matt Ginsberg clue database and download that, and then all you have to do is you're going to go here, hit browse, and then just go to the location of the clue database. So for me, it's just in C program files, so pretty straightforward to find that. Shouldn't take too much engineering if you're not a tech savvy person. Once you link that in, then Crossfire will pull up the list of clues for words that you're working on as you go from the Ginsberg database, which has a ton of puzzles in it. So that's super helpful because it will let you know, have people used this word in a puzzle before? What clues have they given to it? Obviously, some people may prefer to work without that, and that's totally fine as well. And I don't know about these options here, so we're just going to ignore those for the moment. So you're set up with your word list. You launch Crossfire. It's going to ask you what size grid do you want to make. 15 by 15 is standard, but it can do other sizes. It doesn't have a grid library, which is one feature that separates it from Crossword Compiler if you're thinking about comparing those softwares. So that's one thing that Crossword Compiler offers. But there are also other ways of finding grids online, and of course you can build your own. So we are set up with our dictionaries. We have the word lists that we're going to use. We've launched Crossfire for the first time, and now we've got a blank grid. One thing you might want to do is just go to the summary tab here and give your puzzle a title, an author, and copyright. The reason for that is when you go to export it later, the .puz, which is the sort of standard puzzle file type, is going to require you to have all those to be able to export it. The note is not required, but if you have something special going on or you want to leave a message to your solver, you can use that to add a note to your puzzle there. The grid interface is pretty straightforward. You can move around with the mouse or with arrow keys. So arrow will switch directions, then you can move around like that. So we're going to make a super simple theme today. I don't think we're going to fill the whole puzzle. Again, this is just really to demonstrate how the software kind of works, what Crossfire's features are. So we're not going to go all the way through filling, but we're going to go through some of the steps of it just to show you how this software works. I'm going to title our puzzle Little Debbie because we're going to use some Little Debbie snacks. Author, that's my name. Copyright, I just put the date. I don't really know. You can put your name there depending on what you're doing. So let's pull up real quick. We've got our list here. So we've got a nice set of 4 10s that we're going to use to make our puzzle here. And again, if you're looking for tips on how to construct a puzzle, this is not the stream for that. I would recommend you look up Patrick Barry's Crossword Constructing Handbook. It's under $20. It might be $10 or less. It's an incredibly good resource if you are constructing. So that will tell you all about how to place themers and build the theme and all that stuff. So I'm not going to go super detailed into that today. but if you're looking for that, there are great resources out, and there are also plenty of other streams and VODs you can watch. Ross Trudeau, and Parker Higgins do some construction on their stream. Adam Nicole has done construction on his stream as well. But very briefly, let's just go through this. So we're going to go to row 3. And I apologize if there are people in chat who I'm missing. I know Nora was here. Hi, Nora. Again, I can't pull it up. And my Twitch on my iPad, I can't pull up right now because it's not logged in. It's going to cause a whole 2-factor thing to get me into there. So sorry if I'm ignoring you. I appreciate you being here. I will go back and try to take questions at the end, but it's going to cause, again, my stream to freak out once I pull that window up. Again, I apologize for being new at Twitch and all that. But I think it's important that people see the menus and stuff here in Crossfire. So hopefully I'm not missing anybody. If I am, I apologize. We're going to plop zebra cakes down here. Because it's got that Z. I think we're going to be able to deal with that there. And then we're going to give a couple rows space. And we're going to pop in our other 10s, which are Swiss Roll and Nutty Buddy. So now you're going to see all these red squares popping up here, which is telling us that they're not fillable, which makes sense because we don't have any black squares in this grid other than our theme replacements. And you'll notice, like, when I put this in, these show up in red because they are forced squares by the typical rules of crossword square placement. If you don't want those to show up, you can go to grid here and you can uncheck report unchecked squares. So for example, if you're building a theme that for some reason is going to have unchecked squares or answers of length 1 or 2, while those typically aren't allowed in crosswords, there's plenty of themes that might use that. So you could uncheck that. If you don't want to build a crossword with typical symmetry, you can unclick preserve symmetry. That's going to allow you to build a puzzle, for example, with left-right symmetry, vertical symmetry, diagonal symmetry. So if you want to do those special symmetries, Crossfire doesn't have a way of doing that, but you can do it manually by unchecking preserve symmetry. Tooltips here. This is just going to allow you to mouse over and see what words you've got in, possible clues and stuff. So that's pretty nice. I typically leave that checked there. Once you've put in your theme words, you can mark these from quick deletion by Control-T. Obviously, any of my control commands on Apple are going to be Command-T instead of Control-T. I think those are all pretty much the same. So we can mark these. They'll turn purple, which means they're theme, which means they're not going to get deleted accidentally by just backspacing. But if you do select them and hit delete, you can delete that way. Control-G, it's going to delete everything that you've selected. So if you select the whole grid, Control-G, boom, clear it out. Up here with these little arrows are going to let us go back and forth. And probably the most important thing that we should have done is to save our puzzle. So let's go File, Save File As. We're going to call this Little Debbie. Boom. So that's going to save us a Crossfire file and a backup. And then now we can use this button, Quick Save, to save. I recommend doing this really often. Crossfire does have some pretty big bugs in it at times that can cause it to crash, and typically you can save and exit out of a crash. One thing to really be aware of with Crossfire, if you open up another instance of Crossfire, which you can do, and you open another puzzle, it's possible that when you then go to save this first puzzle that it will overwrite it with the name of the second puzzle that you have pulled up, or vice versa. Can't remember. In any event, it's really easy to accidentally overwrite a puzzle by doing that, so be really careful when you do that, because you have the potential of losing an entire puzzle if you do it the wrong way. So just make sure, if you have multiple instances open, when you go to save, I would just do File, Save As, and then make sure that you're saving it to the file name that you want to save it to, and in that way you can avert disaster. So be very careful about that. So again, now we see all these red squares. Crossfire doesn't like that, so it's really not going to allow you to put in stuff until you've put in enough black squares that it thinks the grid is fillable. However, there are things that you can do before you've built the grid, and some people like to fill in a lot of stuff before they go about filling out their entire grid. It's just different ways of doing it. But if you want to do that, you can come right click here, and then you could do show matching words for down, and that's going to show us all the stuff that can fit in this slot without regard to any other words in the puzzle, whether it's a good cross or not. It's just going to show us what works, what doesn't. So in this case, basically it's just telling us all the 6-letter words that are in our word list with an R as the third letter. There's another way to do this, which is to go to the lookup tab. So we're going to go over here, and in this tab, basically what you're doing here is what's called a regex search, which is short for regular expressions. Again, that's totally beyond the scope of what we're doing today, but if you look that up, you can find all sorts of cool kind of shortcuts, and it's actually a very, very powerful tool as far as searching your word list and figuring out stuff from there. There are also some tools online, such as Wordlisted, which I believe is by Adam Aronson, that allow you to do some similar things in a really simplified kind of a way. But so if we want to look up that slot in another way, we can just do periods for wildcards, and then put the R in there, and then length 6. We'll set our minimum score to, for example, 50. And that's going to pull up pretty much the same thing. Again, you can see the clues down here that are pulling from Matt Ginsberg's clue database. So that's going to let us see how often has this word been used in puzzles, what kind of clues have they been given it. And I'll just talk really quickly about kind of word list management. So the workflow that I found, if you want to go through and work on your word list and rescore stuff. So for example, let's say we want to look at 5-letter words starting with W. We set our minimum score to 0, so everything shows up. We're going to scroll down to the bottom, and we'll start looking through. We've got some like typos here, so we're not going to do anything with those. But we'll look, and say we come upon something that's interesting to us. I was looking through this earlier, and where did I see? There was one, made me stop. Wally. Okay, so this is scored at 30. This is probably below my minimum threshold, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. But if I, for example, saw that and said, oh, hey, like in the UK, they call Where's Waldo, Where's Wally. That's kind of a fun angle. I'm going to go ahead and hit Control E. It's going to pull up this Edit Word tab. So we'll set it to, say, 55. And then this is showing what dictionary is this going to change it in. Again, this is my primary dictionary, so that's going to put all the changes in there by default. If you want to change it in another dictionary, then you can select it there, or you can delete it from those word lists. In this case, I don't need to change any of these dictionaries because this is my primary dictionary, so I'm just going to change it like this, leave these as is, and just mess with them the least amount of time possible. But that's my workflow for rescoring. Control E, type your score, hit enter, and then what you're going to want to do pretty regularly, go back, File, Save Dictionary. That's going to save all the changes that you've made to your dictionary. Make sure you don't lose any of those, because again, this does crash relatively often. Let's go back to the Config tab for a minute, and now we're going to look at our fill settings, because we're about to get into that. So here we have minimum fill word score. So this is looking at the scores on your word list, and basically below the minimum threshold, it's not going to pull up those words at all. So at the moment, it's set super low. We'll bump it up to like 40, so that words, for example, on this list that were below 30 aren't going to make it. Longest shared substring, what that's doing is looking at shared letters between entries. So it's set to 4. So if a word shares more than 4 letters in a row in any part of its string, it's going to automatically cut that out. You can set it super low, you can set it super high. If you set it super low, for example, the 2, that would prevent things, for example, like run to or ask to, if you don't want to dupe those. But it's also going to cut out a lot of potentially totally usable things that just do 2-letter strings for random reasons. I think 3 is a decent setting there. It's going to cut out some valid things, but chaos can reign. If you don't notice things and then you fill a whole grid and you've got some overlapping things, that can be kind of frustrating. So that's a setting that you'll want to play around with and see what you're comfortable with. There's also a way I'll show you once we've filled in some words of checking that kind of more manually. These last 2 things, candidate ranking quality and speed quality trade-off, basically have to do with how long Crossfire is going to take to search through the valid options for fill. I just have this set on default, and then I turn this up to quality. So it's going to take a little bit longer depending on the strength of your computer processor, but it's going to crunch more possibilities that way, basically, versus giving you a faster result. We talked about the dictionary tab. We talked about this. So let's punch in some squares real quick. See if we can't just break this up a little bit. That's not going to work. Let's do it like there. And again, we're going to want to make sure that none of these columns are 15 long because that's going to cause chaos. So we have to break up this center. Do like so. We're going to add in, again, this is not construction stream, just showing hypotheticals here. So if we want to check how this is going, summary tab is going to be where we're going to go to look. This is going to tell us the number of words. Again, you're going to want to keep that at a certain level depending on if you're building a themed puzzle, themeless puzzle. 78 is a typical max word count for themed puzzles, although plenty of outlets like Universal and I think USA Today these days allow 80 words depending on the type of theme. Average length, that's going to tell you a lot about how open or how constrained your grid is. Number of blocks, again, some places max out at 38 or 40. And then the average score, again, is pulling from word lists. The word count is a pretty useful feature here. One thing that you might want to do is check on your number of 3s and minimize the number of 3s that you have. And a nice little thing you can do here is go and click. That's going to highlight immediately all the entries in the puzzle of that length. So that immediately allows me to see where are my 3s. If I wanted to get rid of some of those, I could move things around based on that. Or if you want to see where are my theme entries, boom, that's going to show you that. And if you had longer ones, you want to see, all right, where are my 7s, because I might want to put some nice stuff in those spots. That's there. At the bottom, it's going to show you your letter counts. This is going to be across all tabs, I think. It'll show you in bold the ones that don't have any. Likewise, you can highlight letters in your puzzle that way. So if you're looking to build a pangram, you're going to want to take a look at that and make sure that you're getting all the letters you want. So on the word list here, you can see we have our theme words in. Star Crunch, not in my word list, so I'm going to go and edit. Score it 95 because I like it. Boom. And save my dictionary. So from here, typically my next spot to go would be the fill tab. And it's not going to autofill, but what it is going to do is it's going to start crunching and see if it can fill this grid at all. First of all, let's take off this highlight for a second. And if it's unfillable, it'll pop up and say unfillable grid. And if not, it's going to start crunching some stuff. So you click around, find a slot. We have this 7 here. You can already see popping up with some options for crosses and downs. Once it's crunched something and it likes it, it's going to pop up in bold. That means that that option is going to have a potential fill. And again, depending on how your settings are, it can take longer. And obviously, depending on how difficult of a grid it is to fill, it's going to take longer to crunch. And of course, depending on your computer settings. So typically, I'll let this run until it evaluates all the candidates and comes up with, all the potential fills so that it knows it has a fillable grid and gives you some options. But while it's doing that, let's look really quickly at how we would organize. So right now, this is in alphabetical order. So we can sort that way. We can sort by word score. So for example, if you're looking at this slot and you're saying, I don't care what it's forcing in the grid, I just want to get something really cool in here, you can organize it by word score or reverse word score, right? So clicking it just flips it. And so 95 fan mail, so that must be on my personal seed list because I have that at 95. So I'll say, okay, cool. Now what's happened in the grid is one of the features of Crossfire that I think people like the most, which is that it's showing us a potential fill. If we were to slot in fan mail, it's showing us some of the stuff that would give us a potential successful fill using that. And in this case, you can mouse over and see it's not the only possible option for those slots. In fact, there's quite a few different options. But in other spots, like for these downs, they might be more fixed. And I'm going to click through a few of these and see if I can... Let's put one in. Let's put fan mail in there. And then now it's going to crunch again. And as you put stuff in, more and more, it's going to get more and more forced. I'm just trying to put stuff in here so I can demonstrate one of the features. Oh, I forgot to mention, so word score obviously is one way of looking at things if you're looking for the best possible word. Most of the time, I have my list organized by final score. So grid score, basically I think it looks directly at the crosses. I don't use grid score very much for filling. Typically, I'm just looking at final score, and what that's doing is it's taking into account all the rest of the grid, all the words that's going to be forced as I use these. And so typically, the higher the final score of a word, the easier a job you're going to have filling the rest of the puzzle once you have selected that word. So if you look now, with this word I've selected peeps, and you look at one down, you'll notice that those letters are darker shade than the other potential fill letters. What that means is that if we put peeps into this slot here, MLS app is going to be forced at one down. There are going to be no other options for a one down. So no matter what happens, if we put this in, we're going to have this at one down. The lighter shaded letters, we still have potential for other things to go in place. So it's showing us where the most constrained parts of the grid are, which is a really nice tool of Crossfire. One of the best, features of Crossfire, in my opinion. But if you're not a soccer head like me and you don't want to use MLS app in your puzzle, we might go back up the list, look on something with a higher final score, and now you can see Reefs is going to give us some more options at one down. We're going to have all these options here that pop up. So that's going to give us a little bit more room to play with. So that's just a really nice, as you're going around filling, a way of visualizing how constrained a certain word is and what it's going to force. So for example, geeks, that K is going to force Ricks down here, which obviously we don't want to use. So we can just say, all right, we're not going to use that and move on to something else. Again, can undo or redo using the buttons here. The quick fill button is basically what other software calls autofill. That's going to take whatever you've selected and attempt to fill. Absolutely never hit this quick fill button while the software is still evaluating candidates. I can tell you for sure, at least in previous builds of Crossfire, this is a 100% guaranteed way to crash the software. It's not going to close it out. Again, you'll still have a chance to save, but you won't be able to do anything else once you've done that. So if you are going to attempt to autofill something, make sure that you wait until it finishes evaluating all the candidates, and it will say at that point, ready to fill. And once you've done that, then you can attempt an autofill. Again, I don't recommend doing that because you want that human touch. You want to make sure you're not putting in things that you don't want in your puzzle. But you can use it just to make sure that things are potentially there. Again, if it doesn't say immediately grid not fillable, there probably are some autofills. If you're looking, again, to make a pangram, something like that, what you can do also on the letter thing here is select, you can filter by J. And that's going to only give you results that use the letter J. Dr. J. Juarez, nice little cross there. So that way you can find those fills that use that letter. I think typically in the fill tab, it's not going to pop up with every possible word. It's really looking for the best options it can give you. So if you're looking to make a pangram or something like that, or just use scrabbly letters, sometimes filtering it by those letters is going to pop up with fill options that it wouldn't otherwise give you. Best location is a pretty interesting button. What it's going to do when I hit that is it's going to take us to the most constrained location in the grid, meaning the entry with the least number of available possible answers. So let's hit that button. It's going to take us up here. This F is causing some difficulties. So in some places, it might actually be a super easy spot to fill. For example, if you have 2 letters, you're a 3-letter word and it's TA blank, and you have a bunch of letters you can put there, but they all make perfectly valid words. That's not necessarily going to be the hardest spot in the puzzle to fill. It's just the most constrained one. But in other cases, it can tell you, it can identify a spot that's going to be a sticking point. So that's a pretty useful tool. Just looking at this grid, I'm looking at this like B and Z here, and I'm telling you this is going to be a somewhat constrained spot here, as is this one. Again, if you mouse over, you can kind of see the number of possible entries. So in this case, there's about 7 entries that work here. There's about 60 for this one. So you can tell that this is going to be one of these spots where you need to be really aware, because there's not going to be a huge amount of options. I'm just going to run through real quickly all of the kind of menus and stuff to make sure I'm not missing anything, and then I will go back to Twitch chat. Things are going to look crazy for 1 second, and then I will switch the focus to the Crossfire window. Hopefully we won't lose anybody. But I want to just run through stuff, make sure I didn't miss anything that I wanted to talk about here. In the File tab, again, you can start a new grid, quick save often, save your dictionary often. When you go to export, a Crosslight binary, despite its somewhat weird name, is going to be typically what people export to. That's a .puz file that can be used by a Crosslight and any number of other websites. That's your typical puzzle file. Solution image, if you just want to post a solution grid, there's that. And then obviously you can export, the grid and clues. If you want to make a PDF, you can do it this way. You can export it as a New York Times ready PDF if you're looking to submit there. Otherwise, you can just do, puzzle grid and clues. So that's pretty straightforward. Again, you're going to need to have a name and title and all that to export it as a .puz file once you're ready to do that. Again, the config tab here, that's going to be where you mess with your dictionary settings, your fill settings here, your minimum word score. You might want to set that higher depending on what you're doing, depending on what lists you're using. Then we talked about setting up Matt Ginsberg's clue database. That's pretty helpful, so I recommend doing that. The grid tab is basically mostly just things that you can do with shortcuts. So for example, if you want to add a circle, Control O is going to do that. If you want to delete everything, Control G is, and there's one of these crashes that are going to happen at times. So when something like this happens, usually what I do is close these out, back up. Not a problem. We'll just save our grid. Boop. We'll close it out. And then we're going to pull it back up again. Please enjoy looking at all the stuff on my desktop and my Discord. So boom. All right, now we've got it back up. So dictionary tab. This has some options for like merging word lists. I would just kind of recommend, if you're new to stuff, you don't necessarily need to get into all of that. Fill tab here, show sample fill. Having that checked is going to do what we did earlier, where it shows us those extra letters that are being kind of forced or that are options as you go. Show possible letters. So I have one forced. It's going to shade those letters darker. I quite like having those settings because it's going to let you visualize as you go. tabs here, lookup and rebus. So we talked about the lookup tab. Let's go quickly to the rebus tab. It actually is a useful feature here. If you want to do a rebus, which is multiple letters in one square, you can add one here. So let's put dog, and then it says enter your display equivalent. This is just for, I think, for like a crosslight, so that the solver can just put the first letter in instead of the full word. So we're just going to say D, easy. And now we can add in by hitting boop. That's going to put it in, and you can fill around it as you would. Normally, it's going to treat that like those letters, so that's nice. But also, even if you do not insert a rebus, once you've added a rebus to that rebus tab, if we go back to the fill tab now, it should pop up in this list with hot dog. So now, essentially, it has added the rebus to your dictionary for all intents and purposes. So if you don't even know what words you want to use with your rebus, but you know which rebuses you want to use, you can simply punch all those in, you can add all of them, and then go to the fill tab, and it's going to find potential words that work for you using those rebuses without you having to add it in manually first, which is a very cool feature there. We talked about the lookup tab. Again, a very powerful resource, but it's going to require some work on your part to get all the intricacies of that down. I don't know enough to talk about it extemporaneously, but there are some pretty easy commands for starts of words only, ends of word, ends in this string. But I'll leave you to look up those regex things on your own. The clue tab, so once you've put in all your words, I would recommend waiting until you're really good with your grid before you do that. Because if you then go back and change the grid, it's going to delete all your clues. Also, be very careful about hitting like undo and redo on this tab. It's really easy to lose stuff. So again, save early, save often when you're on this tab. And then let's look quickly at the word tab. So if we had a full grid, it's going to show us all of our words, the scores. The X score, I think, relates to how it's affecting the grid. I don't really get too deep into that. But the thing that's useful on this tab is this highlight shared string. And again, what that's going to do is it's going to look for any shared strings of 3 letters or longer. In this case, we could change it to 2. You can make it higher depending on what you're looking for, and that's just going to let you find any dupes. Again, there's nothing in the rules of crosswords that say you can't have 3 letters within a word or phrase that are the same. Even crossing, it's fine. It just depends on how they're being used lexically. So if it's a 3-letter word in both of your entries, then you might call it a dupe and avoid it. But if it's just 3 random letters, even crossing, it's usually not an issue. But in any event, you can find it on this tab. And yeah, so going back to the summary tab here, again, you can see your words and blocks. And I think we've pretty much covered the basics of getting started with this software. I'm going to go back to Twitch streams very briefly. I apologize while my stream goes crazy for 1 second while I pull up back the focus on Crossfire. So bear with me 1 second here. Okay. So, all right, I'm going to go back to chat. I want to make sure if anybody has any questions. Now would be a good time to ask them. And otherwise, I think we're going to wrap up shortly, but let me run back through chat, see who's here. Chris is here, Nora's here. Nora very rarely has crashing problems. Yeah, I mean, if you don't do anything crazy, the software is not prone to crashing. Note that new grid is also open grid, which is ridiculous. Yeah, so if you need to pull up a file that you've made before, correct, you go to new grid. In this case, it's asking us we've made changes. Do you want to save? Yes, we'll save. And then, yeah, you can load a file from here as well as making a new file. So if you need to pull up a grid that you've made before, hit new grid. It's just one of those quirks about that software. Let's see, Crossfire will forget your circles. Yeah, sometimes it forgets theme status. So little things misfire at times. Possibly I need to update. My software because there are new builds. It is more stable, I will say, than when I started using it. Let's see. Will this be saved as a video here or on YouTube? I only caught the last 10 minutes or so. Yeah, it will definitely be saved as a VOD on my channel, and I think this went relatively well. I think I covered my bases, so if we can get it up as a VOD and with a little bit of technical help from my friends, I should be able to cross-post it to YouTube, and then you'll be able to watch the whole thing there. So hopefully it will be helpful to you once we've cross-posted it there. And I'm seeing that this took about 45 minutes, which was about 30 to 35 minutes longer than I was thinking it's going to take. But in any event, hopefully it was useful, or at least will be useful in the future to people who are new to this software. I know it's an intimidating thing to get into. There's a lot of moving parts and things to get familiar with, but it's also easier now to get into crossword construction than ever before, especially with the availability of free word lists like Spread the Word List, and really powerful software like Crossfire. I'll just say really briefly the couple of features in Crossword Compiler that are different from Crossfire. One is that it doesn't have that kind of live fill showing you as you move through different words. So as you kind of fill in Crossword Compiler, you kind of have to go one word at a time, and it's going to go to the next best location and pop up with the words, so you fill that way. A couple features it does have that Crossfire doesn't have. One is it allows bars, which I can't show you in Crossfire, but essentially a bar is like a square, but it goes between squares. And what that would allow me to do, for example, is to bar off a certain region, like bar off this northwest region, and fill it independently. Crossfire does have issues at times. If there's an unfillable grid, even if you select a region and try to fill that region that should be fillable, sometimes it will pop up with an error. So that's one nice thing you can do in Crossword Compilers, to section off regions. And then the other nice feature that Crossword Compiler has is a grid database. It'll allow you to punch in your theme entries and then show you a list of workable grids using those theme entries. So that's kind of a cool feature to at least allow you, and my recommendation would not be to use those 100% of the time, but to kind of give you an idea of what kind of layouts are going to look good and then edit it from there. And it also has a database of cryptic grids, which Crossfire does not have. And so if you're looking to get into cryptic construction, I probably would recommend Crossword Compiler over Crossfire for cryptic construction, because I think that grid library is pretty nice for cryptic stuff. You can build a cryptic puzzle in Crossfire. Obviously, all the fill stuff works just fine, but you'll need to have some experience with how those grids work. So you'll have to know what you're doing as far as building grids in Crossfire, but you can always steal from the best. And yeah, they are. I mean, obviously there are standard rules and stuff that they follow, but Crossword Compiler just makes it that step easier. And if you are only doing cryptic grids, then perhaps that is the better software for you. So again, I'll just plug one more time. If you use Crossfire any amount of time, I would recommend purchasing the license, support the developers, and maybe shoot them an email if there are features that you want to see. That's something that I've been meaning to do, especially for those bars, which I think would be extremely helpful for Crossfire to add. So I may send a email to the developers telling them that I'd like to see that feature, and if you do that too, then maybe they will in the future version update it with that, but it's going to require the support from their users. So please, if you use it for any amount of time, don't just take screenshots and use those. Please actually pay for the license, because it is a very useful piece of software, and the developers, I'm sure, worked quite hard to make it. And even though there are good free alternatives online available, I like Crossfire, and I recommend it. So hopefully this video was helpful to you. If you have any questions, I'm LeBron Swanton on Twitch, or you can find me on the Crossword Discord. We'll try to put some links to Sid Sivakumar's construction stream, some other good resources like Patrick Barry's construction handbook in the YouTube doodly-doo. And if you have any questions, you can drop a comment on there or find me on the Discord. And yeah, hope this video was helpful for people, and have a great rest of your day.